Alright, so if you're a Sonic fan and you've bought or are considering buying an M1 Mac, then there's no doubt been one very important question on your mind. How many Sonic games can you actually play on these things? And today, I aim to answer that question by going through all of the methods available that you can utilize to play games on this system and testing out pretty much the majority of Sonic games available to see what works and how well they work. I guess the reason I'm making this video is because I have an M1 Max MacBook Pro 16-inch with the full 32-core GPU and of course 32 gigs of unified memory. And while there are now plenty of videos talking about gaming on the M1 Max given how powerful they are, there is literally no video that is really covering Sonic games. There is an Apple Gaming Wiki which is showing M1 Mac compatibility with a bunch of big games, but only a few Sonic games could be found there and they weren't even extensively tested, so I figure it's up to me to find out once and for all what the state of Sonic gaming is on the M1 Max. That being said, I figured going into this that it'll be pretty good considering some of the games that they are running on these Macs are pretty powerful, so in terms of power, it shouldn't be a problem, right? But of course, because none of these games run natively, we're gonna have to use all sorts of tricks and compatibility layers just to get these things running, and you never know what glitches you're gonna run into. So I'm gonna go through the methods in which I use to run these games and which games can run through each method. And again, it's worth noting that I am using an M1 Max chip, so my performance is going to be better than anyone using an M1 Pro or a base M1, but you should at least be able to see what runs in terms of compatibility. But if you are using an M1 Mac that is weaker than the one I've got, then you may have to turn down some settings, resolution, etc., or have lower expectations on the kind of frame rate that you could expect to get compared to what you're seeing on the screen. So I guess the first and most obvious method would be just installing Steam on your Mac, just natively. And that is pretty much the worst way to play the games, at least running on the system. Literally none, and I mean none, of the Sonic games on Steam actually support M1 Max. There were a few that actually did support Mac OS, but they were older games, and I don't think they run on M1 Max. Maybe it's because the latest operating systems don't support 32-bit applications. Either way, when you filter your library by games that support Mac OS, the only game that kind of has Sonic in it is the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis Classics Collection, which contain classic Sonic games like Sonic 1, 2, 3, Knuckles, and a few others. So I guess if you wanted to play the classics, you could use this, but it's actually officially not supported on the recent macOS versions. So I was able to boot the game up, and I was even able to play the games on it as long as I didn't use full screen mode. The moment you go into full screen mode, the part where the game is supposed to show just goes black even though the audio is still working. So you'd have to play it without full screen, which is kind of pointless if you ask me, but some people might be fine with that. For those of you who really want to play these games, I suggest keep watching the video because there are going to be better ways to play these games than using this Genesis Classics Collection. But I just wanted to show the one game on Steam with some Sonic content that actually works on the M1 Max somewhat. Now, before we leave off Steam, there is one other thing. Now, this doesn't really count as running the games natively on the Mac, but I thought I'd mention it. You can stream the games from your PC if you have a gaming PC. Literally every single Sonic game I had on Steam ran through this method, which is why they even show up anyway, because you can just stream it straight from your PC. It even works on non-Steam games. Like I have the PC port of Sonic Heroes, which isn't on Steam, and I was still able to run that on my M1 Mac by streaming it from my PC, and it runs surprisingly seamlessly. I don't think it was running at native 4K though, but the experience was very smooth and even didn't seem to have any major latency. Like I had the laptop next to the computer and I couldn't tell that one was delayed. So I guess for those of you who are using this M1 Mac as a secondary device around your house, I guess you do have that option if your PC is on and you want to use your M1 in another room of the house. But overall, when it comes to running Sonic games on Mac Steam, it's a bust. But there is still hope for running Sonic games on the system. And one of the biggest sources of that hope is emulation. And we're going to start that emulation topic with Dolphin, which in my opinion is the best emulator out there in general, because like Dolphin just has great support, great compatibility, just as an overall emulator, and it natively supports M1 hardware. Plus, when it comes to Sonic, there is a wide variety of games you can play on Dolphin because it supports GameCube and Wii. And as most of you know, there's already so many Sonic games on those systems. I mean, like, if you factor in Mega Collection and Gems Collection, you've effectively got a ton of Sonic games all the way from 1991 until 2011. Everything from Sonic 1, 2, 3 to Adventure, 1, 2, Heroes, Riders, like other side games, Olympic games, Colors. Like, if all you were doing was playing Sonic games on your M1 Mac, probably 50% or even more of that time could be spent playing them through here. So naturally, the first game I tested was Sonic Heroes. Initially, Dolphin was set to use the Vulkan engine, and It was working fine at first, and then it had some weird error on the screen saying that the game would eventually crash, and then the game eventually crashed. But then I realized that it wanted you to set it to OpenGL. So once I set it to OpenGL, everything just ran fine. I had it set to 4K resolution, and it was performing pretty well. Like, there was no issues. It ran just like an emulator should. If I forgot to mention this before, Apple have got weird rules when it comes to recording like the audio directly from the computer. I'm sure there's some tedious workaround, but like I just decided to record the microphone audio, which is why you can hear like keyboard sounds and things like that. But the sound is fine when you're playing it by yourself. Also, the video files I recorded are not always running at a perfect 60. They might be like in the 40s or 50s, but that's just the recording. It's not the actual game itself. If I say the game is running at 60 or it's running smooth, then take my word for it and not the footage itself. But yeah, pretty much all the Sonic Dolphin games were running as fine as they would run on usual Dolphin on Windows. There was unfortunately one casualty, which was Sonic and the Secret Rings, which I could not get to work on Dolphin, and since that's the only way to really play that on a computer, that means we cannot play this game. Sonic Adventure DX on Dolphin was dipping frame rate once the gameplay actually started, but there is another way to play Sonic Adventure DX on the M1 Mac, so it's not really a major loss. I'll get into that later. So again, 2 decades worth of Sonic games. It's a good place to get started if you've got an M1 Mac. In terms of difficulty to set up, this is the easiest thing to set up. Later on in the video, we're going to get into more tedious ways of running games on these systems in terms of the setup time, but at least you know you can get started with this. And of course, there's other emulators we need to talk about as well that run natively on the M1 Mac. I'm not going to show every single emulator. For example, you can run PS2 and original Xbox emulation on this. However, there's no Sonic games on those systems that are like exclusive compared to say running them on Dolphin, which runs better than those emulators, so there's no real point to me. I mean, I guess the Plus version of Sonic Mega Collection, but honestly, when it comes to those games, and even the original Mega Collection games, you could just emulate the original games on emulators that support that original system, and that's honestly how I'll be playing it and what I would recommend. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through every Sonic game that I've tested one by one and explain how I got them working, essentially. But because a lot of them use the same methods, I want to describe the methods first so you understand them. We've already talked about Dolphin, so I don't have to explain that one, but there were a few other Mac emulators that we tried out. There's a software called OpenEMU, and that basically allows several emulators to run in one big application, and it runs on Mac, and it does work, but some things didn't work. For example, DS emulation did not work at all. In fact, I was not able to get DS emulation working, period, on this system. And also some emulators would work, but then wouldn't work at their maximum capacity. For example, you can run PSP games in this, but you can't upscale the resolution. Now, PPS SPP has got a way to build an M1 version of their emulator, but it's very tedious, and right now it's a tinkering situation, so you're gonna struggle to get that running. Same with 3DS, there's an unofficial way to get Citra working on the M1 Mac, but it is very tedious and crashes, and it's not something reliable if you really want to play 3DS Sonic games. But now we're gonna talk about the two biggest ways that people use to run games on their M1 Mac, and that is crossover and parallels. Now, if you play other games besides Sonic, and especially like AAA recent games, you probably want to look into crossover more, but in my opinion, if you're just playing Sonic games, there is no reason for you to even bother with crossover. Now, the difference is this: Parallels just allows you to run Windows ARM version on your M1 Mac. So I've got Windows 11 ARM running through Parallels. It's basically a virtual machine, and yes, it can play Sonic games. This ARM version of Windows has some form of compatibility layer to emulate x86 and x64 applications, meaning if all goes to plan, anything that runs on regular Windows should run on Windows ARM. I remember the days when virtual machines couldn't even game, and so we've come a long way. But the point is, the difference between Parallels and crossover is that crossover doesn't require running Windows, but it essentially acts as a compatibility layer to allow you to run Windows applications without having to use Windows. Now, there's a main pro and a main con to this. The main con is that it's way less compatible than simply just running Windows and Parallels. But the pro is that if something actually does work properly, you're most likely to get a better frame rate from using crossover than using Parallels, which can make it appealing for games that actually support it. But because the crossover team is more focused on, say, recent AAA releases, they're not really patching it to support Sonic games. I had a lot of trouble running Sonic games in crossover. I got some working, but there was nothing in crossover working that wasn't working working in Parallels. And Parallels are just easier to use because it's just like using Windows and setting up the game like you would on a regular PC. And that supposed performance benefit, because we're dealing with Sonic games which are not exactly pushing the graphical boundaries of the systems they're on, you wouldn't even notice any kind of performance benefit using crossover. So again, I recommend against crossover for Sonic games. Games straight up wouldn't launch or might even crash the system and then have to open Activity Monitor. I'd say just go with Parallels. It costs a little bit more, but I think it's worth it. Anyway, I'm pretty sure I've shown a lot of gameplay already in this video, but we are going to go through each game one by one, as I said. So there will be timestamps for those of you who want to see a specific game and whether it can or cannot run. And therefore, we are going to start with Sonic 1. So if you remember earlier in the video, I talked about the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis Classics game available on Steam. I ran that game through Steam on Windows using Parallels, and if you use the simple launcher where it just plays the games directly, it worked fine, no problems there. That means effectively you can play Sonic 1, Sonic 2, Sonic 3 and Knuckles, Sonic Spinball, and Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine all throughout this one Steam game. Unfortunately, this game has also got another mode which you might have seen earlier in the video, where you can kind of go into the game room and select the games from there. That game room did not work. I tried running it, it just went to a black screen. I think I could even hear the sound effects in the background, but essentially if you wanted to play it that specific way, you couldn't. But you can play these games. Of course, there are other ways to play these games as well, like as we mentioned, Sonic Mega Collection on Dolphin is another great way to play these games. And honestly, the games look sharper in resolution on Mega Collection Dolphin than they did playing this Steam version. Now, for those of you who like Sonic CD, I tried running the Steam version of that through Parallels, and unfortunately, it runs, which sounds like a bad thing, but hear me out. The game runs at the hertz of your monitor, and the M1 Max come with 120 hertz monitors, even though the game is supposed to run at 60. So while the game runs, it runs at twice the speed, and I haven't found a way to disable this. Maybe there is a way, maybe some kind of external frame rate limiter, I don't know, but it runs at twice the speed, which in my opinion is a good thing, because that means you can get through this mess of a game in twice the speed. The point is, Sonic CD on Steam was a bust, but fear not CD fans, because I was able to get the Sega CD emulator in OpenEMU on Mac, so not using Parallels, and that was able to run Sonic CD. Of course, unfortunately, that's the original version, not the Whitehead version, so as of right now, Whitehead version is not running properly. Now, you may be able to sideload, because as you know, the M1 Max can run iPhone and iPad apps, but only the ones that they allow you to run from the Mac App Store are there, and the Sonic games are not there. Aside from that Sonic Racing iOS Apple Arcade version of the Team Sonic Racing game, which I didn't test, but I mean, it's made for it, so it's obviously gonna work. Now, sideloading is very hard to actually set up. I've not been able to do it. People are even saying you might have to downgrade your operating system just to sideload any iOS app that you want, but I guess you could run the iOS version of CD this way if you were able to figure that out, but again, very tedious if you can, and you might want to use that for Sonic 4 Episode 2 as well, because that game just doesn't run at all. I ran that on Parallels with Steam, it just crashes after like trying to run the launcher, the resolution setting doesn't even show up. Sonic 4 Episode 2 was a bust. I almost tried to run it on Dolphin, but then I realized that Episode 2 never actually came to the Wii. I tried Sonic 4 Episode 1 on Dolphin, and that was just running really slow, so that was just unplayable. And with the Steam version on Parallels running Sonic 4 Episode 1, full screen just didn't work. Like, the screen just stayed white. You could hear the sound effects, like if I controlled the keyboard, you could see that the game was actually functioning, but just the screen stayed white. But I tried running the game not in full screen and in windowed mode, and the game started working fine. Even at the highest resolution I threw at it, it was running fine. So you're gonna have to deal with it in windowed mode if you really want to play Sonic 4 Episode 1 that badly. Finally, to end off the classic games, we got Sonic Mania. And this game pretty much runs fine. In Parallels, I opened it on Steam, ran fine, full screen, looked fine, there was no issues whatsoever. I even got mods working. Now, there was one mod that crashed the game when I tried to open it, but then I tried that same mod on my regular Windows PC and it crashed as well, so I'm guessing it's a problem with the mod. Aside from that, the game runs smoothly, no lag, no issues with mods whatsoever aside from that one particular mod. So I'd say for the classic era, the only main casualty here is Sonic 4 Episode 2. I know people don't consider Sonic 4 classic era, but I'm gonna include it because it's called Sonic 4. Literally every other classic Sonic game had some way to play it one way or another. Even if you couldn't get the best version of CD, you could still get some form of CD. So I'd say for the classic fans, you're pretty much set if you want to play on the M1 Mac. Also, as a quick bonus, I tried out a Game Gear game on OpenEMU and it ran fine. I tried out Knuckles Chaotix for 32X on OpenEMU and that also ran fine. So yes, the side game should probably work fine on OpenEMU as well. I tried running Sonic 2 Community Cut on Parallels Windows 11 and it was running kind of choppy, so I wouldn't consider that a playable way to play the game at this current state. However, Sonic 3 Air ran perfectly fine. So in my opinion, if you want to play Sonic 3 and Knuckles, Sonic 3 Air running through Parallels is the best way to do it on the M1 Mac. But now it's time to move on to the adventure era. Now before we get into the Steam games, we're going to start off with Redream, which is a Dreamcast emulator, and it runs on M1 Macs. I was able to run Sonic Adventure Dreamcast, Sonic Adventure 2 Dreamcast, and Sonic Shuffle, and they all ran fine, albeit I couldn't raise the resolution. I think Redream just doesn't do that, so you're going to be stuck playing it that way. The only game I'd recommend playing that way is Shuffle, because that is a Dreamcast game that has no other version. But for the other games, I'd highly recommend against it, because when it comes to Sonic Adventure DX, there's so many other ways to play it. Now I did mention the Dolphin version of DX was lagging in gameplay, dropping to the 20s in frame rate, and it was a bit horrible, so avoid that. But I was able to get the game running in both crossover and parallels. We're gonna focus on the parallels version, and it was actually kind of lagging, not unplayable, but definitely noticeable lag, which was surprising because I had already run more demanding Sonic games before I tested Sonic Adventure DX, so I was like, this should run like a dream, but apparently not. And then I installed Beta SADX, and it just fixed everything. Like, the lag just went away, and Sonic Adventure DX with Beta SADX, for those of you who don't know, it's a fan mod. I don't know if it's a mod. It improves the game, basically. Allows it to run a proper widescreen and a ton of other fixes like a higher resolution HUD. I ran it at the maximum resolution of 3456 by 2160 for the M1 Mac. Technically, the max resolution is 3456 by 2234, but that includes the section with the notch. So without the notch, it goes up to 2160. And I think that's the better way to play full screen games, because if you try and go into the notch section, Parallels will just scale the whole thing back and you'll have a bigger bezel. And with Beta SADX, it ran like a dream. No problems whatsoever. Perfectly fine if you want to play the game like this. SA2 didn't launch. I tried running it on Steam through Parallels, and I actually noticed that the configuration tool for SA2 is the same one as the one for Sonic 4 Episode 2, and that game didn't run either. So there's probably some kind of consistent reason why these two games in particular didn't even open, because these are the only two games on Steam running through Parallels that didn't open at all. Nonetheless, SA2 on Steam was a bust. However, as we already mentioned, you can play the Dreamcast version on Mac using Redream, but I would rather recommend playing SA2 Battle using Dolphin, which worked perfectly fine. So even though the Steam version doesn't work, there are still some ways to play Sonic Adventure 2. Now we get into the GOAT, also known by its official name Sonic Heroes, and this isn't actually on Steam, but there is a PC version of the game and it runs fine running through Parallels Windows 11. Now the original PC version of this game has already had issues running on like operating systems higher than say Windows 7, and I've already got fixes in place to run them on regular Windows 10, and I had to bring those same fixes over, of course, naturally, so a fresh copy is not going to work the way you want it to work. Nonetheless, the version I've got is modified to run at 3456 by 2160 and it looks fine, runs like a dream. There were minor graphical glitches in the ground, like little black shapes or black lines, probably see them on the screen, but not enough to stop me from playing the GOAT or anything like that. But it was definitely something I noticed. Frame rate was smooth, no issues there. I even got the game running on crossover, although I couldn't figure out how to make it full screen in crossover, so I wouldn't play it that way. And of course, as mentioned earlier in the video, the game does run fine on Dolphin as well, so you can play it that way too. I would say between that and the PC version in Parallels is probably the best way to do it. Either or, your mileage may vary depending on your taste, but nonetheless, the GOAT is well covered on M1 Max. Tim Cook obviously knew if he fucked that up, then he'll be getting a call from me, so little Timmy didn't want to smoke, so he wasn't gonna mess around with that. Shadow the Hedgehog. No native PC port, so again, you're running this through Dolphin. Simple as that. Runs fine, no issues. I mean, obviously emulation isn't perfect, so there could be mild emulation issues, but it's perfectly playable and it's pretty much the only way you're gonna play it, so no problems here. Same with Sonic Riders, ran it on Dolphin. It basically ran fine, but I noticed one issue where when Sonic was grinding on a rail, then the whole game would start to chug. It was only when Sonic was on a rail though, not on ground or any other part of the track. There is a PC port of Riders. I tried running that through Parallels and it wasn't running for some reason. I don't know, maybe I could have figured it out if I kept tinkering, but the Dolphin version was working, so it didn't really seem like any real incentive because I wasn't going to get any extra performance running the PC version. But nonetheless, I had to try. Before we fully leave the adventure era, I just want to talk about a few other side things. GBA Sonic games work fine. fine. You can run them in OpenEMU. I tried Advanced 1, 2, 3 Battle. They all work, no problem. You can even run Visual Boy Advance in Parallels. You can run an emulator in a virtual machine and it still worked. To be fair, most of the emulators I ran in the virtual machine did not work. I tried a bunch of them, but Visual Boy Advance is easier to run, so I guess that worked fine. So no issues there. Unfortunately, this is where we hit a bit of a snag. Now, to be fair, we're talking about Sonic 06 here, which you thought I was about to diss 06. No, I was just about to mention the fact that it never got an actual PC port, so running it was always going to be hard anyway. If it doesn't run on native Windows, then running it on Mac is already a bit of an issue. Now, on a regular computer, you could run Sonic 06 through the Xenia Xbox 360 emulator, and you could kind of open it on RPCS3, but it wasn't fully playable. Nonetheless, those emulators don't have Mac versions, at least not right now, and I tried running those emulators in Parallels through Windows 11 in the virtual machine, and they just wouldn't open, spouting some kind of error or whatever. So again, 06 was not playable in that way. However, Sonic P06 actually worked fine in Parallels, and that's a pretty demanding fan project. Those of you who don't know what that is, it's a fan recreation of Sonic 06. It's not fully complete yet, but 2 stories are done, Sonic and Shadow story, and I played that in Parallels at the max resolution of 3456 by 2160, and the frame rate was definitely choppy, but that was not a Parallels issue. This game was just really demanding. When I lowered the resolution down to 1920 by 1200, it ran really well. This is in a virtual machine, mind you. So this was a surprisingly impressive feat that this was able to handle P06. I only allocated 8 gig of RAM to my Parallels machine, even though I've got a 32 gig machine. So for 06 fans, original game, not doable right now. Maybe in the future they'll make 360 or PS3 emulators for Mac, but as it stands right now, P06 is the only way you can experience some form of 06 on this machine. Now, continuing on our mid-2000s journey, we've got Sonic and the Secret Rings, which I couldn't get running at all. The only way you can run this, because again, no PC port, is through Dolphin. And for some reason, Dolphin ran every other game but this. I don't know why. I checked the ROM file, I downloaded a different ROM file, same issue. I played this game on Dolphin on regular Windows on my PC, so it's clearly something that Dolphin has been able to handle on Windows, but on the M1 Mac version, out of all the Sonic games, Sonic and the Secret Rings just wouldn't run. Maybe the Dolphin devs will fix this at some point if people bring it to their attention, but as it stands right now, Secret Rings is unplayable on M1 Max. And the bad news keeps coming for mid-2000s fans, because Sonic Unleashed, the HD version, just like 06, was exclusive to 360 and PS3, and both those emulators don't work, so you are not getting the HD version of Unleashed. Now, of course, Unleashed, the Wii version, runs on Dolphin just fine, so if you want to play that version of the game, no issues there. Now, those of you who hate half of Unleashed might be going, oh, that's cool, I could just, run the Unleashed project, right? We'll get into that later. Sonic and the Black Knight, again, is another Sonic game that didn't get any form of port. Wii game exclusive, runs on Dolphin, no issues there, so you can get your Black Knight on. Now, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing is not actually a 2000s game. It is early 2010, but we're going to include it in the 2000s category since it is a Jason Griffith game, and it runs fine in Parallels. Maxed out the resolution, the game ran fine. Probably mild stutters, but not really anything significant. So if you want to play All-Stars Racing, the original version, it runs fine. Now, before we move on to the meta era, there's a few things I want to talk about as well. Obviously, there's some great games on the DS like Sonic Rush Adventure, and I guess Sonic Chronicles is also on the DS. And from the meta era, we've obviously got Colors DS. But as I said before, I could not get DS emulation working. I tried the emulators, I ran the game, it just went white screen, nothing happened. So as it stands, I found no way to get DS emulation running on the M1 Max. As for PSP games though, it's a different story. With OpenEMU, you can get Sonic Rivals 1 and 2 working just fine. As I said earlier in the video, you can't raise the resolution using OpenEMU, so if you really want to raise the resolution, you'd have to use PPS SPP, but they haven't actually released a native M1 version of their emulator. As it stands, there is a fan workaround to try and get that working, but I was not able to. But if you do get that working, you should be able to raise the resolution of those games for a better experience. I did try running PPS SPP, the Windows version, through Parallels, and that was choppy, so that's a no-go too. Oh yeah, Sonic Riders Zero Gravity. Almost forgot about that one. It works. But now that we're done with the mid-2000s, it's time to get into the meta era, or the 2010s of Sonic, and we are going to start that off with Sonic Colors. Now, originally that was a Wii exclusive game, so naturally you can run it through Dolphin and it runs just fine. Obviously the Wii game is capped at 30 FPS, but there is a 60 FPS hack which I didn't enable, but in its native state it was able to run just fine, no problems there. I know Sonic Colors Ultimate is not a 2010s game, but it's a remaster of Colors, so we're going to talk about it now, and I was able to run that surprisingly well, and that's the most recent Sonic game to come out. I installed the Epic Game Store in Parallels, ran the game, and it ran pretty much fine. I mean, at the highest resolution of 3456 by 2160, it was definitely lagging a lot. I wouldn't call it super playable at that resolution. Once I turned down the resolution to 1920 by 1200, it became way more playable. It still had some lags. There's some lags that once you max out the virtual machine, it starts to just hit these little stutters here and there that you will notice, but I would say at 1920 by 1200, it was definitely playable. I even tried putting it at the lowest possible resolution just to see if that would fix the lag, and it didn't. Some games are just too demanding to fix the lag entirely, and this is one of them. Crossover doesn't even support the Epic Game Store without using a serious workaround like using a fan launcher, so again, not worth it to use Crossover for something like this. And now we move into Sonic Generations, and I've got good news and bad news. The good news is that the game runs well. Running at the full 3456 by 2160, it ran not perfectly smooth. There was still some lag, as I said, with these more demanding games. There's always going to be a little bit of lag. Lowering the resolution won't fix it entirely, so there's really no point. If you have got an M1 Max, you should just run it at 3456 by 2160, but I won't deny that it was a smoother experience when I lowered the resolution, even if it was only by a small degree. Your mileage may vary with an M1 Pro or a base M1, you might want to lower the resolution for that, but for the M1 Max, I was running Generations just fine, not perfectly smooth, but definitely well above playable. The bad news is that mods are a bit of a bust. I installed the mod loader, I tried some mods, and it just wasn't working the way I was hoping. This was a big sticking point for me because I really wanted mod support to work. I tried a recent stage mod, Shivery Mountainsides, and that's a more demanding stage mod, and as it starts to load the stage, it just crashes the game, so that was a no-go. So I thought maybe I'll try a much older stage mod. So I went with the Unleashed project because that is one of the most popular Generations mods, and I was able to load into the first stage with more IO, but then when I beat the level and it gets to the point where it's supposed to save, then the game just crashes. So that's a huge issue. You can't really run the Unleashed project like that. I mean, I guess technically if you were able to put a completed save of the Unleashed project in there, maybe you could just play each individual level and accept the fact that it's gonna crash upon finishing, but that's a bit tedious if you ask me. But yes, mod support is definitely not 100%, so your mileage may vary. You could try a bunch of different mods if you have the system and see for yourself, but it's clear that it's not a set and forget situation like it is on a regular Windows PC. Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed does work, but there was an issue. The launcher or the config tool was definitely a bit glitched out. It set the resolution to 1728 by 1080, and the place where you would go to switch the resolution was completely glitched out compared to just running it on a regular Windows PC, so I wasn't even able to raise the resolution just off of this glitch alone. So I ran it at 1728 by 1080, and at that resolution, naturally it ran fine. I was able to run the game. Mild little stutters, but nothing severe. Like, definitely very playable at the resolution, but I don't know what it would have run at 3456 by 2160. The aspect ratio didn't fully scale to the M1 aspect ratio. I think it was stuck at 16 by 9, but yes, that is playable on the M1 Mac. Sonic Lost World is also very playable. Ran that at max resolution, once again through Parallels, and besides being capped at 60 by 9 aspect ratio, it just ran fine. No issues whatsoever. Very mild stutter, but it was not even a big deal. Like, it was definitely way less stutter than, say, Generations or Colors Ultimate. That being said, when I tried to run mods, the game just wouldn't open. I'm guessing it's an old mod loader. People don't really support in Lost World like they used to, and yeah, I couldn't run mods. Sonic Boom Rider Lyric doesn't run, only works on Wii U. There's no official Wii U emulator for M1 Max. The Windows version in Parallels doesn't load the game. Running it in Crossover doesn't load the game. It's a no-go for now. And finally, that leaves us with the last main series game, and that is Sonic Forces, and unfortunately, this one is a bit of a bust as well. Now, I ran it through Parallels on Steam, and the game runs. Even the performance in terms of frame rate is not horrible, but there's serious graphical glitches. Like, Sonic is just flat out invisible unless he's jumping or doing certain specific animations. And the avatar looks like a burnt out Tonic Trouble. So clearly something's been messed up in this translation layer from x86 to ARM. Because if it wasn't for that, the game would be perfectly playable. But I mean, this kind of just ruins it. Well, I mean, it was Forces, it was already ruined, but you know, this ruins it further. Now you might be thinking, well, there's a Switch version of Forces, right? Could we somehow get that version working? And as it currently stands, Switch emulation is not really a thing on the M1 Max, but the people who work on Yuzu and Ryujinx have both said that they're working on M1 Mac versions of their Switch emulators. So that means in the future, Forces may be able to be played. And that would also apply to Sonic Frontiers as well, because that's also getting a Switch port. So if you're thinking, will I be able to play that on my M1 Mac? I'm guessing if these Switch emulators are ready, you should be able to play Sonic Frontiers on the M1 Mac at that point in which it comes out. I mean, the PC version of Frontiers might be playable on this as well, we don't know, but if it's a DirectX 12 exclusive game, which we haven't had a Sonic game that's done that yet, but if it is, currently Parallels and Crossover don't support DirectX 12, so you can only play games that support DirectX 11, so something to look out for if you're considering getting this machine to play Frontiers in the future. Now there's some 3DS games like the Inferior version of Generations, as well as the Sonic Boom games that were on 3DS, but I was not able to get a 3DS emulator running. It's technically possible with some serious hacks and workarounds to get Citra working, but I wasn't able to get it running, and even the people that I've seen getting it running still had crashes and major issues with Citra, so as it currently stands, it's not a reliable way to play 3DS Sonic games on the M1 Mac. I almost forgot to talk about Team Sonic Racing. It works well, menus run at 16:9, but the actual gameplay fills the screen. Frame rate is a little bit choppy, especially at max resolution, but if you lower the resolution to 1920x1200, it's absolutely fine. There'll always be some minor starters though, but aside from that, no real major problems. So overall, it seems like for the M1 Mac owners, playing Sonic games is pretty doable. I mean, in terms of the main series, there were some casualties, of course 06, the HD version of Unleashed, and of course Forces, but with everything else in the main series, there was at least some way to play, even if all versions or all ways didn't work. Even 06 had some form of saving grace, which was P06. Now, I guess if you include the storybook games as main series, then that also means Secret Rings was a no-go zone. But I would say the majority of Sonic games do seem to work on these M1 Macs. A ton of side content worked as well. Game Boy Advance games, PSP games, but we did have casualties in the form of DS and 3DS. Wii U was a no-go zone, but we had Game Gear, Genesis. But yeah, as it stands, Sonic gaming on the M1 Mac is looking pretty good. Pretty good. Hopefully we do get that Switch emulator and at some point a 3DS and DS emulator, but you know which games you want to play the most, so you can go through the video and decide if it's worth getting an M1 Mac. I mean, you shouldn't get a Mac for gaming anyway, but if you do want to play Sonic games on your Mac, at least you can watch this video and know which ones you'll be able to play. Odds are you'll probably be satisfied to a decent amount with the selection available, in spite of the unfortunate casualties. But yeah, man, let me know what you guys think about this video. This is a different kind of video, not something I usually do, but as someone who owns the M1 Mac, I did want to test this and figure out what worked and what didn't, because no one was really focusing on Sonic. If you got any questions or anything else you want me to test, you can let me know in the comment section below. If you got any fixes or any tips to get something working that wasn't working before, you can also let me know that in the comment section below. But yeah, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell. Make sure to check out the non-Sonic channel, the link will be in the description. But that's all I have to say right now, so Premy out.